I'd like to welcome the candidates and those of you in the audience to this final Commissioners Forum. I want to thank the Carroll County Times, the Community Media Center, WTTR, because they have been incredibly supportive of this whole initiative. My name is Claudia Lewis. I am president of the Carroll County League of Women Voters. The branch of the League of Women Voters began in 1920 as a direct result of women attempting to get the right to vote. The goal or the mission of the League is to inform citizens about issues that will affect their lives and to get them to be active within the voting community. The League works hard to increase the voter turnout and registration for the vote, and they also work hard for advocacy. Advocacy is a little bit different with the League. As a personal citizen, I can express my opinions, but if I am expressing a League position, it must have been performed as a study where both sides, all sides of an issue have been investigated and examined by the members of the League and then voted on for consensus. If there is no consensus on a question, then we cannot be an advocate for that particular question. We are nonpartisan. We encourage informed, active participation in understanding public policy. Tonight, we're going to hear from the candidates for District 5 County Commissioner. Mr. Jim Lee from the Carroll County Times will be our moderator this evening. Mr. Lee will be introducing the candidates, and he will explain some of the rules that we need to follow to get this on air without a big hitch.
Thank you, Claudia. First of all, welcome to our candidates, Doug Howard, Kathy Allison. Thank you for being here tonight. Go over the rules quickly. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the questions. You'll each answer the identical question. There'll be no debate. This is an informational forum. At the conclusion of the question period, before the end of the forum for the evening, each candidate will have 2 minutes for a summary statement. The League will be timing the responses, right down there, and will use cue cards and a bell to signal the remaining time. The timekeeper shall ring a bell 2 to 3 seconds after the final stop signal is given, and the moderator shall immediately interrupt the candidate and discontinue the statement or answer. At that time, the microphone will be silenced. Questions will be selected from those submitted in advance to the Carroll County Times, the Community Media Center, the League of Women Voters, and from tonight's live audience. So if you have questions, please prepare them and people will be around to pick them up. In addition, viewers on our live streaming program can submit questions during tonight's broadcast via Twitter using the hashtag Carroll2014. Tonight's forum is being recorded, so we ask everyone to turn off their cell phones and that attendees, refrain from applause or making noise during the forum or do anything visible or audible to express support or opposition to any candidate during the forum. So we will start with opening statements. You'll have 3 minutes for your opening statement, and Mr. Howard, we'll start with you.
All right, well, good evening. I want to thank the League of Women Voters and the Community Media Center for putting on this forum. I also want to thank those in attendance and those watching on television and the internet. You know, elections are important, and this one is very important for Carroll County. This election will determine not only who will represent each of the 5 commissioner districts as a board, it will determine the direction of the county for years to come. It has been my great privilege to have been elected in 2010 and to have served on the first board of 5 commissioners. It was also my honor to be 3 times elected by my fellow commissioners as president until deciding to pass that opportunity to another this year. I have said on many occasions it must be the job of Carroll County government to provide for and maintain excellent public safety, infrastructure, and education for our citizens. We must balance the needs of today with good long-term planning for the future and continue to build our business base so we will have the resources to keep Carroll County strong while reducing the tax burden on our citizens. This is what I have worked for since being elected in 2010 and what I will continue to pursue if elected for 4 more years. I am proud of my strong conservative voting record, and that under my leadership as president, our board cut taxes 3 times after 20 years of not having any tax cuts, eliminated millions in unnecessary programs, reduced county debt, sold unneeded properties, successfully rejected the rain tax, fought for the Second Amendment rights, implemented E-Verify to combat illegal immigration, and voted against Race to the Top, well, I did individually, along with Commissioner Frazier, accepting those funds. I'm also proud that during this time I have voted or initiated programs to make Carroll County stronger, including the Carroll Business Path, the Solid Waste Work Group, the Nonprofit Work Group, Celebrating America, the District 5 Business Advisory Council, Veterans Advisory Council, the Veterans Shuttle, the Veterans Services Officer, and the long-term planning process we call Carroll 2030. Most of these programs were cooperative efforts with various agencies, including many citizen volunteers, that cost little or nothing to implement. I advocated for shifting law enforcement to the Sheriff Department, saving millions, having advocated for our firefighters, and having been the strongest supporter of education and education funding on our board. I know that to keep Carroll County a great place for families and businesses, we need to keep Carroll County strong. And I have proven that I have the experience, the ability, the desire, and the leadership to do just that. I believe in working in ways that bring people together and allow for citizens to participate, and I think that has been very effective. I hope tonight we talk about Common Core, because I know that's been an issue that's been raised, and yet I voted against Common Core the very first time it came up and have been strongly opposed to it since its inception. And throughout this evening, we're going to talk about a great many things. I want to say that I appreciate Ms. Allison's willingness to get in the race and put her name on a ballot. And I hope we have a positive and professional exchange, and look forward to doing that with her tonight.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Thank you for being here tonight. I'm here for Carroll County, and I'm waving a caution flag because we are at a fork in the road. District 5 deserves a commissioner with conviction to conservative values who will behave with integrity and consistency. Eldersburg and Sykesville need a leader who will properly prioritize spending, preserve our rural heritage, and tell the truth, and put principle ahead of personal political ambitions. My name is Kathy Allison. I'm a farmer and a business owner, and I'm a true conservative, not a fake. I will work tirelessly to shrink big government. My opponent is not a reliable Republican. His deeds do not match his rhetoric. He's played both sides of the fence on too many epic issues. He fought education choice, Second Amendment rights, English as our official language, and an open Common Core forum. Mr. Howard claimed he supported these things because he casted yay votes. I watched the hearings, and I assure you, Mr. Howard did everything possible to derail these initiatives. He cast defensive votes in the 11th hour to keep up appearances of being a Republican. That's why I'm here tonight, because Mr. Howard is no Republican. When Mr. Howard talks about keeping Carroll strong, what he really means is making government bigger. Of the 28 people on his 2030 work group, 21 of them either worked for government or received funds from government. Carroll 2030 is of the government, by the government, and for the government. The group held closed meetings, and one member who receives money from the commissioners was recruited by Howard to endorse him on a campaign video. These activities are unethical, conflicts of interest, and render Mr. Howard unfit for office. I believe these kinds of behaviors are the reasons he has no longer the president of the board. I'm here tonight because Eldersburg deserves a true Republican who will uphold her oath of office with integrity. This election is not about marketing, it's about honesty and commitment to Republican values. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll jump right into it now with the first question. Ms. Allison, if you could answer first. What do you think District 5 voters are most concerned about in our county government, and how would your election of you, help resolve that issue?
Well, I would certainly feel that most constituents are concerned about our economy and certainly what's happening in our educational system. Both of those are, of course, affect the economy. So I would, feel that those should take a priority in this campaign, and what I could do working with the Commissioners Board to give them some relief.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, first, let me say, after that stunning opening statement, the ability to attack should not be confused with the ability to lead. I think most important to the citizens of District 5 are public safety, infrastructure, and education. They want their roads paved. They want the services provided. They want us to make sure that our education system is excellent. And that's why I've been talking about curriculum when other commissioners were going around counting seats and looking at boilers. The simple fact is that as you go through this process, you realize that those three areas are what we need to be most concerned about. That's why I'm very proud to have advocated for putting the presence of the sheriff's office on Liberty Road, because as crime continues to be a concern for any growing community, we will have the presence of law enforcement there. We've had improvements in road situations by well-placed stop signs, by the extension of Dickinson Road. We've worked tirelessly on economic development to bring about the Warfield Complex and the Carrolltown Mall so that there are jobs here, opportunities to purchase things and for people to just be in the community, and so that we don't end up with the blight that was sort of left behind by a mall that had been really in disrepair. It is those core issues, not some ideological national or state agenda expressed through the Board of Commissioners, but the local work of government that needs to be done. Now, at the same time, I don't know how much more tax relief I could have brought than 3 tax cuts in 3 years, although anybody that saw the newspaper today will know that I've proposed a 4th year of tax cuts in the 4th year. So I am very confident that we can accomplish what we need to do for District 5 and at the same time do it in a way that relieves burden on our citizens. Underneath all of this is our ability to work together as a community. The divisive language that has become part of the Fraser-Rothschild machine has got to stop. And it sounds like I think they may have found their 3rd vote here in Miss Allison. And so I think we need to be talking about the issues and what's good for our district. It's schools, it's roads, it's infrastructure, well-funded and done fiscally responsibly.
Thank you. Speaking about education, well-funded, what in your determination constitutes well-funded, and whom should be making the determination on school funding, the Board of Education or more to the Board of Commissioners? Mr. Howard, you can start.
We have an independently elected Board of Education. I know we have some candidates out there tonight, and I hope they would be in favor also if they get elected and having control of determining what the school system needs to effectively do their jobs. The Board of Education has come back with a budget proposal this year asking for $166.8 million. The plan that Commissioner Shoemaker and I put out yesterday calls for our board to basically fund them at $165.3 million, with $1.5 million coming out of their accumulated fund balance to get to the 166.8. At that point, we're not taking a step backwards in terms of layoffs. We're not taking a step back in terms of Hoshua, the outdoor school, and some other key critical areas. We're making investments in technology. Now, to simply say that whatever the Board of Education asks for is where we need to be clearly is not possible and has not been the case. But there comes a time when we really need to be able to make sure that we don't fall further and further behind. So it needs to start with the Board of Education. It's a privately elected board. It has its own public processes. It needs to bring that over to the Board of Commissioners. Then we've got to overlay that on what's available, what's reasonable, are they doing the right kinds of things? You know, we have to be stewards of the money because we're making those financial decisions. This year, we have the unique opportunity to be able to meet that number in a way that does not increase any tax burden, does not increase any spending burden, and in fact allows us to do it at the same time we're going to be reducing taxes. We have the highest graduation rate of any system in the state, the lowest dropout rate, and when businesses were polled during our Carroll 2030 process, which actually was a fairly open process, the bottom line was the business community, as through the Chamber of Commerce, told us that the most important thing to businesses in Carroll County was a strong public education system. Many of us came here for that. And so this is where I think we need to be, 166.8, and I think we have a clear plan to do that.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Is it wise to raise taxes to increase school funding since enrollment continues to decline? The Board of Education doesn't care if we raise taxes because more revenue will help them implement Common Core. And every member of the current Board of excuse me, of Election supports Common Core, and this is a reason they need to be replaced. Furthermore, the Board of Education is the reason our schools are under financial stress because they have failed to make the tough decisions to reduce costs. They have failed to redistrict, and they have failed to address the fact that by 2018, we will have nearly 4,000 fewer students than in 2006. The Board of Education needs to reprioritize its budgetary demands.
Thank you. Moving on. In your opinion, what specific actions need to be taken to attract more business to Carroll? Ms. Allison, could you start?
Yes. Attracting more business, well, first of all, we've got to get government out of the way. There are too many restrictions, and the taxes keep going up, and in fact, everyone's personal expenses keep going up. The variety of taxes Maryland has put upon us has taken away quite a bit of our money, and I propose that we have to revisit how we can stop interfering with private business growth. We need new money coming into this community. And so my idea is to figure out how we can figure out how to get government out of the way.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, I want to reemphasize that taxes in Carroll County, since I've been county commissioner, have gone down 3 times in 3 years. And so I think, first of all, the notion that we're raising taxes to fund education is just completely factually incorrect. But secondly, it is the biggest factor, I think, in our ability to be competitive with other jurisdictions across the state. See, Maryland has become so unacceptable a place to do business. They do so many things that make it hard to do business here that we are losing businesses to other states. Where Carroll County is seeing a net increase in business is people that are in Maryland that need to be somewhere near the government or near a military installation, but are looking to be in this general area, but are finding Carroll County to be competitively advantageous. So how do we do this? Well, one thing we do that by is our continued effort to lower taxes. And this will be year 4, if we get it accomplished, of doing that. The other thing, though, that we do is have an incredibly strong public school system. And I will tell you that is the single biggest driver of what bring businesses here. And so I've heard, lots of different things, but if you actually talk to the businesses and business owners, go talk to Lehigh Cement and ask them why they expanded here. Go talk to Kenore Brake and ask them why they came here. Go talk to Land, Sea, and Air and ask them why they took on a much bigger facility. It is the public school system. And so we need to basically continue to invest in that. Now, in addition to that, we have an excellent economic development department. We've done some innovative things there where we split it up so that there's a focus on small business and a different person focused on attracting and retaining large companies. Because of that, our Carroll Business Path has been successful in helping businesses get started, and all the while we are seeing an influx of companies like Carlisle out of New York that's coming here to manufacture women's clothing. The bottom line is this. We have moved the needle. We need to continue the practices that we've put in place, but I've got a proven record of lowering taxes and attracting businesses, not just simply, ideas about how to do that.
Thank you. Both of you in some of your answers have already mentioned the Carroll 2030 plan, the group that's come together. Some of our questions actually are addressing that topic or asking about that as well. One comparing it to Pathways, saying it's just a different name, another saying that it's Plan Maryland. So let's talk about planning. What importance do you put on a master plan of any sort for the county or long-range planning? Ms. Mr. Howard, you get to go first.
Sure. The fears the people have about the way planning is done sometimes at the federal and state level, while founded in many cases, should not cause us to think that it is a good idea not to plan. And unfortunately, that has become some of the mantra of some of those on our board. If we're planning beyond tomorrow, then somehow we're being duped into a government program. The simple fact is this: it is our responsibility to make decisions not just that affect today, but affect the county into the future. If you build a school like we did down in Mount Airy, that has an implication for 50, 60, 70 years into the future. How do you do that without planning properly? The reason why I formed Carroll 2030 was to get an understanding, and I've formed a number of work groups, and I know that's some consternation for Ms. Allison as well, is because I like to work with folks that are involved in the process to understand things and put together ideas that then I in turn bring to the board, as I did with Carroll 2030 in a very public forum. So the idea between Carroll 2030 was to get the leaders of the community and say, how long are you planning into the future? The Sheriff's Department, the hospital, Union Mills Homestead, any of the different organizations that are out there doing things that impact our community. And as we looked at their plans, then the question became, what do you do with a community that's growing? How do you meet the needs, not to expand services, but simply to provide the same level of services when you know there's growth coming and there's no, easy way to get there? So the idea of the group was to come together and look forward down the road, which they did very effectively. The whole idea was to bring an idea for a process and a draft back to our Board of Commissioners to decide if that might be something they want to pursue. They can choose to pursue it. They can choose not to pursue it. No decisions were made. No subversive actions were taken. It was an idea to look down the road as to what the community might need and what we might need from a funding standpoint. They did an excellent job with it. It'll be a useful tool, and I'm very proud of having initiated it, frankly.
Thank you, Ms. Allison.
And the question again, please?
Oh, I sort of put two or three of them together.
Sorry.
But basically, you both talked a little bit about Carroll 2030, and we have questions, one of them comparing Carroll 2030 to Pathways, another saying it's like Plan Maryland. So the question is, what importance do you put on master plans or long-range planning for the county?
Well, I believe that more input needs to be done by the constituents. And America is based on a representative form of government. Howard has adopted an alternative approach, and it's called collaborative governance. It's part of that fundamental transformation we've heard about almost 4 years ago, and it's being practiced in Carroll County. We need to be rejecting this consensus form of governance commonly known as direct democracy. When direct democracy is used, the government picks who the players are in projects, and this stifles free markets. Carroll County is supposed to have a representative form of government, and yet Doug Howard operates under and aspires to this consensus form of government. Such is the very nature of Doug Howard. He says he's a conservative, and yet he is consistently using consensus-oriented methods. Grant monies from federal and state sources have mandates and strings attached when they arrive in Carroll County. And when that grant money dries up, these collaborative partnerships will be screaming at the Board of Commissioners to raise your taxes. Collaboration governance brings public and private stakeholders together in forums with public agencies to engage in consensus-oriented decision-making. The facilitator will plant his gold in the minds of people who actually have no answers. Perfecting this sort of approach is the facilitator's ability to put these ideas in people's heads as if they were their own, and then offering to help them achieve the target goals. By planting his solutions in their heads, orchestrated concepts will eventually come out of the participant's mouth as if it were their own.
Thank you. Let's do a little follow-up on that question. Because if you go over the county commissioner's agenda on any given week, you'll see many items where they are signing off on housing grants, HUD grants, public safety grants, where they're getting state or federal dollars. Our nonprofits get matching funds. So when is it acceptable and when is it not acceptable to take state or federal money for some of these programs? And Ms. Allison, if you could start.
Well, it depends. I mean, you know, some mandates the state sends down. If it comes unfunded, then what do? We've got to get the money for it, and if they command that we do it. If you take grant money, some grant monies come with strings attached. Some comes with a one-time offering. Also, it's possible to take money from the state or the federal government that would get you started, but you have to examine what your future commitment will be.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. First of all, when we go through the grant process, grant applications have to come to us 3 times. They have to come to us before they're applied for, they have to come to us when they're accepted, and then we actually look at them a 3rd time to accept the funds. And we scrutinize them very closely. Before, and this will probably scare some people too, before I was a county commissioner, I actually was the executive director of Carroll Area Transit System, a nonprofit. I was very well-versed in grants, what it took to get them, what obligations you take on when you go through them. And part of it is having a very well-talented and detail-oriented grants office, which we happen to have in the county, that understands what obligations we take on before we accept grant money. However, I think it's important to realize that there are some times when the money is not the issue. And I'll go take you back to March 25th, 2011. We had been in office just a few months, and the issue of accepting Race to the Top funds, which was the funding source that was sort of what was hung over the heads of local governments to implement Common Core, came before us. In a 3-2 vote, the board accepted the money from Race to the Top. Commissioner Frazier and I voted against it. Commissioner Rothschild, by contrast, not only voted for it, but complained that we weren't getting enough. The fact is that came with more strings than anything I've ever seen, and we've been dealing with it ever since. The simple fact is I articulated that day in a 40-minute dissertation why this was a bad idea, why we did not need the federal government involved in our processes. So you got to take each one step by step and then go through the process of understanding what you're taking on and obligations. I think we do that very effectively. And I think that I'm very pleased with the way we handle grants in the county.
Thank you. If you ask businesses in the county, and I believe the Chamber of Commerce did in a recent survey, and if you ask residents throughout the county, they'll tell you fiber optic or high-speed internet is a major issue in getting it. What are your plans for growing fiber optic networks or getting high-speed internet throughout the county? And Mr. Howard, you go first.
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the best legacy that was left to us by the prior Board of Commissioners was the investment they made in the fiber optic broadband network. I've said that on many occasions, and I believe that to be true. It gave us an infrastructure, a highway, so that from a technological standpoint, you could be as far out as rural Carroll County and still be connected from a technological standpoint. So we started with a framework that went to government buildings and schools and facilities like that, and is in and around business communities. But now we find that the challenge is it's very expensive to get that last mile. So there's a process underway right now. For example, in the city of Westminster, they're piloting a program for them to provide some of that activity. We've had proposals by our technological folks about the possibility of bringing in, they call them huts, where you're able to bring the technology a little closer to a centralized place, so when businesses are paying for that last mile, they're paying considerably less. And I think there's an opportunity there for us to balance the infrastructure needs of the community with free enterprise, because there are a lot of companies that want to get involved. One of the challenges, and we've seen this not just with broadband, but with our cable contract and other things as well, is that when you're in a rural area, there are a lot of companies that want the contract to service your congested or your more urban areas, and no one wants to go to that house that's, you know, way up the road and there's only one up there and it doesn't have the density. So we have to continue to work that process and leverage the power of being a county to say, well, if you want the quick and easy stuff, you got to do some of the more complex and more difficult stuff. And I think that's true of broadband as well. However, I also think that it's going to be interesting to see what other companies emerge as this technology becomes more available. And I think a key and critical part of this was getting through the framework itself. And I'm pleased that we were successful in doing that last fall. But broadband's a big issue. If we really want to attract businesses here, we have to have it.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Well, I have built networks professionally, and people can wax plenty on what a network can do when they're building it. Much documentation and speculation goes down. I question the intent of this network, however. I know that many years ago, there was a project that began called Augusta, and that is a fiber optic network that was the original was 10,000 miles of fiber laid for the federal government. And I believe that this network is a continuation of that fiber network when its final product is done. And also, the park examinations that are going to be used in Common Core are going to be very expensive for us because they are computerizing so much of Common Core. We're going to probably take on a great deal of expense and burden with this network going in. Yes, they could say, you know, the speculation is that we want to get a network to these rural areas, but I am quite concerned, and I don't have access to the topology to make that final judgment, but I am concerned that it could turn into a very expensive project for this county, and the major purpose being what's going on in Common Core.
Thank you. I like this question that was submitted by an audience member. What would your mother-in-law or father-in-law say is the main reason to vote for you? And Ms. Allison, you get to go first.
I'm divorced.
Is that?
And my husband's parents were dead when we married. Sorry.
Mr.
And that's the
Howard.
truth.
It's an interesting question whether you're divorced or not, really. I suspect that it's really relates to the responsibility as a public official when you have children in the community, when you're raising children in the community. I'm the father of 6 children, the fourth of which is about to graduate from Liberty High School. We have 2 more in the public school system. We've had a great success in the time since we've come here to Carroll County. And it's very clear that the decisions that are made in terms of our budget, the Board of Ed's budget, what goes on in the community, crime rates, those kinds of things, have a direct impact on how their grandchildren, her grandchildren, will grow up. And so I think it's probably an understanding that I get that I'm committed to that, that I consider that to be the most important measure of whether we're being successful as a community or not. So I would hope she would be supportive in that regard.
Thank you. Next question. What are your views on agricultural preservation funding in the county? And Mr. Howard, you can go first.
Agricultural preservation funding in the county should be a very high priority. It has been an extraordinarily successful program. It is successful on a number of levels. I believe we still rank, if not the highest, among the highest in terms of acres preserved as a percentage of our overall landscape. We talk a lot about remaining as a rural community. It accomplishes that in many respects. We also know that when we exercise an easement and you have a farm that could have had 27 houses on it or 34 houses on it or whatever it might be, for the future, those all represent houses for whom we will not have to build a school. We will not have to provide additional policing or fire or an EMS. So it's a hedge against growth. And so there's that aspect of it. The Ag Preservation Program has also helped us save farms and keep them productive in the form of agriculture. You know, there are a lot of people that think agriculture is part of Carroll County's past, part of its history, which it is, but it's a vibrant part of its present economy, and it really needs to be a vibrant part of its future. And so I think that we have seen a commitment by this board to be involved in ag preservation. We did get a little bit of a hiccup when some of the legislation came down from Maryland, and I think we realized that bad decisions made by the federal and state government should not cause us to make knee-jerk bad decisions at the local level, and we reinstituted the program. I've been disappointed that sometimes we get a little hung up on development rights. We've had votes against easements that should have been done to take acreage and put it into ag preservation that weren't done, but by and large, I think it's been very successful. And even with the plan that Commissioner Shoemaker and I put out last night, $2 million had been taken out of ag preservation in the recommended budget by our Department of Management and Budget to try to get things to balance, and we have $1 million going back into it. And I think that's very important for all those reasons.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
I definitely support the preservation of agricultural land, and any fund from government will depend on the funds that are available. Obviously, we all know that our budget is quite tight now, but anytime these funds become available, I would certainly support preserving agricultural land. And I must compliment the wonderful job that I see on the agricultural land in Carroll County. People take very good of their land, their waterways. I have yet to find any concerns with runoff or with erosion. The farmers in this county do an excellent job.
Thank you. The current Board of Commissioners is finishing the first term in which we have 5 commissioners, each elected by a specific district. Looking over the past 4 years, how has expanding the board from 3 commissioners elected at large to 5 elected by a district worked out? And are there changes that could be made to make it better, or is everything going well, or how do you see that whole thing as it unfolded for the last 4 years? Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
Watching the board, I've found that there is definitely some problems there with my opponent. He seems to have quite a temper. I've watched a lot of these board meetings, and I've seen him slam out of the meeting and slamming the door. So, and I also see some contention when they're doing some voting. So as far as the commissioners working together, I suppose that they have a lot of work to do. They can not always agree on something, but certainly I would like to see more civility. Also, I find a great deal of concern with an individual commissioner who takes the liberty of creating work groups in secret, unbeknownst, without a directive from the commissioner board, because the board is supposed to, it is a body, and no one should be rogue, making decisions outside the proper process with that body of government.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, let me take this in two. First, let me address Ms. Allison's concerns about my behavior on the board, and then we address the actual question, which was the structure of 5. One is, there's no question that one day I did get up, walk out, and slam the doors after I was accused of some things by Commissioner Rothschild that were pretty unconscionable. I did get a call from my mother that day that she's watched many of my sessions. She's watching right now here at home. She lives up in Boston, so I want to acknowledge the fact that since she and I had a talk, it's very similar to one we had when I was about 17 years old. That hasn't happened again. The bottom line is this. There are some things that are interesting as the way we put these work groups together. But I will tell you, if I spent as much time in work groups as some commissioners spend with other commissioners behind closed doors working on ideas, I think that would be probably concerning. When I have an idea, I go out and ask who should be involved in this discussion, and we put a work group together. As an individual commissioner, it's my responsibility to bring ideas to the table, to bring well-thought-out ideas to the table, and the fact that I go out and seek input, as I did on Common Core, as opposed to the publicity stunt, which was the Common Core Forum, from which none of my fellow commissioners took any action at all, I'm proud of these work groups, but everybody seems to be missing the point that when those work groups do any work, I bring them back to the board. I can't make any decisions individually. I bring them back to the board, and because of that, we have a veterans shuttle. Because of that, we have Celebrating America. Because of that, our board just adopted the Veterans Advisory Council, and none of my fellow board members have raised a concern, at least publicly to me, that this is a concern in the way that we're doing this. Beyond that, the 5 by district works if you raise issues by district, but you solve them based on what is best for the community as a whole. And I think that's the key. But yes, do we need changes? We do, but only in certain districts.
Thank you. Our next question from the audience. Mr. Howard, you go first. Would you be in favor of a countywide vote for commissioner with each living in their own district?
I really haven't given that a lot of thought. I think there's a lot of benefit to being responsive to the people in your district. So I think this is probably more in line with the way things ought to be structured. I know there's some concern, there's some difficulty when any 3 commissioners can make something happen and you didn't vote for those commissioners. So, I think it's the kind of thing that might merit some consideration. I know what some other jurisdictions have done is had maybe 4 districts and had 1 at large, so everybody's at least voting for their 1 local and then 1 in a more broad way. I actually think it's way too early on in the experiment, though. We're just coming up on the first real re-election or first, I guess, next iteration of the 5 by district. And I think it takes a couple of cycles to really know if it's the most effective, if it's working. The thing that works for me is I know that we have regular town hall meetings. We get to talk to a lot of citizens. We get great turnout at them. So I know that citizen participation is very high in District 5. I know if there are issues in District 5, I'm generally aware of them. It makes it a lot easier for us to give the kind of recognition that we should give when we have Eagle Scouts and Exceptional Girl Scouts and various 4-H programs and things like that, because we each have areas of responsibility. So at this point, I think really I would be inclined to say that we really need a little bit more experience and to see what a different set of personalities, whoever they may be, might bring to what our understanding is of the 5 by district.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Well, I could say I would agree that I think it's pretty early to decide if you need to change that, change to a different format. So basically, one can continue to discuss it over a period of time and get more feedback.
Thank you. Our next question, it mentions again Vision 2030. It says advocates in its vision statement affordable housing for all socioeconomic levels. What is your position on this vision statement? So I guess, what is your position on housing for all socioeconomic levels? And Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
Well, I don't think it's government's job to force people to live places or direct, that I believe maybe the concept you might be referring to is some HUD program where they're taking assessment of populations and deciding that they need to re-engineer the mix of who is in that population. So I'm not quite sure of the inference of your question, but I don't think government should be engineering population movement.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, yeah, I would actually agree with that 100%. I think the market should drive what's available, and the market should drive what's utilized. And, again, I think that Carroll County has been successful in that regard. I think there are times when the market comes to us with ideas, and because of, it's interesting. You can't love the market and love property rights and only like them when they come up with the answer that you come up with. And so there are times when the market comes to us and says, you know what, we'd like to build this kind of housing, or we'd like to have some apartments above, our shops. And, those that say they're for property rights and let the market decide, all of a sudden get very weak in the knees because, oh my gosh, we may have something that looks like a townhouse. I mean, either the market decides or the market doesn't decide. I don't think the government needs to be in the business of designing houses, where people live, how they should live, how many bedrooms per person, or any of that stuff. Nor do I think that was the purview or the suggestion of Carroll 2030. I got to tell you, I'm pretty excited about how much Carroll 2030 has caught your attention. I mean, as a project that we worked on, I think it's pretty neat that so many people are engaged in the discussion. But I think the bottom line is this. I think it simply is one of those broad statements that says, you know what, over the course of time, it's good for a community to have a full array of housing options. It's good for a community that has law enforcement agents that can afford to live in the community. It's good for a community that can afford to have teachers live in the community. I believe the market will get us there, but I think that's all that statement represents, is a recognition of that fact.
Thank you. The next question comes from our Twitter feed. It says, please ask the candidate's position on charter government. Mr. Howard, you get to go first.
Well, you know, again, we're still very early on in this form of government. I think it's notable that other jurisdictions like Frederick County and Cecil County have moved in that direction. And, you know, I think that's something to keep a watchful eye on. I know there was an article done about it not too long ago. I have to say it's pretty far off the radar as far as I'm concerned. I think it's one of those things right now that, you know, the county hasn't expressed, the community has not expressed a readiness to go there, at least the last few times it's been brought up. When and if it gets looked at, though, it needs to get really looked at, not with the silly arguments that sometimes get made that are designed to sort of scare everybody off from even having the discussion. And usually they're made by the people that are most benefited by keeping the power structure the way it is right now. The fact is, I can't think of too many decisions I'd rather have made in Annapolis than made here. So that's, you know, something that has to be considered. By the same token, I think that with charter government runs the risk of additional taxing authority, additional expense, things that are the things that we need to be very concerned about. So I wouldn't rush to that at all. I think it's a good example that we were able to go from 3 commissioners to 5 with no increase in what it costs to run our county government. I think that was a success. So I don't think you necessarily have a cost increase. And really, for someone to say, is charter government good or bad? It's almost like asking just if government's good or bad. It's all in what's in the charter. You can write a very conservative charter, you can write a liberal charter, you can write a controlling charter, you can write a charter that shouldn't exist at all. And so I think at the end of the day, when and if the community's ready to embrace that discussion, it's really going to depend on what the charter says and how it would work. I just think it's very early on to be having that conversation.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Well, I think certainly I like antiquity and I like preservation, so I would question why. Sure, you could have a conversation about it, but the commissioner form of government is a respected form of government. It has been Carroll County, I think, since 1857, I think. Not maybe a little off on the year there, but it's been its form of government. If people want to go to a different form of government, I would have to hear some really good reasons.
Thank you. The stormwater tax, the rain tax, has been highly controversial. How would you work with municipalities to accomplish the goals mandated by law and devised by the Environmental Protection Agency? And Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that, please?
The stormwater tax or rain tax has been highly controversial. How would you work with municipalities to accomplish the goals mandated by law and devised by the Environmental Protection Agency?
I thought the issue of the rain tax was resolved in Carroll County, that we won't have the rain tax.
Okay, the question is, how would you deal with municipalities to accomplish the goals that are mandated by? That would be the mandated stormwater projects.
Well, perhaps I don't have the proper knowledge of it. I thought that the rain tax had been barred in Carroll County, and now you're referring to municipalities. Do you mean the municipalities within Carroll County?
Yes, Carroll's municipalities.
Well, I still don't have the right knowledge because I didn't know that the municipalities were an exception.
Okay, Mr. Howard?
Yeah, the rain tax was certainly controversial. I think the position that we took, that the Carroll County has been a very good environmental steward over the years, that the funds were already in place to do the projects that needed to be done, and that those funds were already budgeted, left us in very good stead. I think, unfortunately, a bit of grandstanding by one or two left us in a situation where we taunted the state enough until they came after us again. Fortunately, we were able to then put that back together in a way that we are not getting penalized, and we can go back to the original premise, which is Carroll County is a good environmental steward and does not need an additional burden on its taxpayers. The difficulty, and I think what the question relates to, though, is that there's another set of permits that are issued individually to the municipalities. And in that regard, they also have to come up with and have the option of implementing their own rain tax. They would have been covered had we had chosen to implement it. And so now they're trying to figure out how to deal with the things that are going to fall under potentially their permits. Now, the difficulty in all of this is no one even knows what's going to be required until these permits are issued. But what we're trying to preemptively do is to work with the municipalities, because to get the most cost-effective projects done, we feel there may be some real benefit in doing that across all of the municipalities. So the question is, do we have the ability to bring the municipalities together under one permit in partnership with the county and use our money most effectively? So actually, tomorrow night, we have a meeting with the Board of Commissioners in each of the municipalities, and the subject is this very item, is how can we come together and work out something? It has been suggested by some that we should leave the municipalities to their own devices, maybe test some new legal doctrines and see how they fare. My belief from the very beginning is we need to work hand in hand with the municipalities and not leave them out there hanging, and make sure that we do a good job of finding a collective answer for this particular issue, because if we do, the state won't be able to ride roughshod over us.
Thank you. This next question that we got sort of goes along as a nice follow-up to that and the rain tax and the state and everything. It's a bit loaded in its phrasing, but the premise is solid. As commissioners in dealing with the largely partisan Maryland state legislature, such as the rain tax, flush tax, individual property rights, ag preservation, gun rights, Plan Maryland, would you go along to get along with the powers that be or stand up for the majority of Carroll's citizens? So how much do you go along with what the state tells you have to do, and how much should we be standing up and fighting? And Mr. Howard, you can go first.
Well, I think this is an easy question to answer, because anybody only needs to look at my record. I mean, the fact is, when Plan Maryland was kind of being shoved down our throats, Commissioner Rothschild and I were down at the MACO conference. The guy spoke first, he spoke second. We were face-to-face with the governor, addressed the concerns that were at hand. We got a delay in that process. The outcome of some of those efforts was the Rural Coalition, and the result of that is that I think we've found a voice to be able to address some of those things. The rain tax I just explained from the very beginning, we took issue with that. So I don't think there's been a reluctance at all to stand up to the state. Now, I also believe, though, that there are ways to do that. And, the idea that somehow screaming at the top of one's lungs is the only way not to be an appeaser, I think is absolutely ridiculous. And I think it has incited and brought about more problems than it has brought about solutions. And so we need to realize that the Carroll County government is a creation of the state. That is not something I made up. The way people use their explanation of commissioners' roles under the 10th Amendment is a misunderstanding of the 10th Amendment from the word go. And the idea that somehow standing up and pretending you have powers you don't have is somehow virtuous, I think is actually quite dangerous. So the fact is, what we need to do is be able to, first of all, make Carroll County strong. You make Carroll County strong by having a sound budget, our infrastructure in place, our school system strong, then you're in a position to stand up to the state. I've never seen anybody be able to stand up to somebody in a better position by weakening themselves first. And then we take on these challenges. And we do it very, very effectively. But at the same time, you have got to recognize that a lot of what happens in the community happens because we work with the state. And anybody that says that that's just not true and that they'll stand up and fight them every day needs to look at their own votes on where they've accepted funds and programs and everything else.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Please, the question again.
Following up on the previous one is, as commissioner in dealing with the largely partisan Maryland state legislature in issues such as the rain tax, flush tax, individual property rights, ag preservation, gun rights, Plan Maryland, would you go along to get along with the powers that be or stand up for the majority of Carroll citizens?
Oh, I definitely stand up for the majority if the majority doesn't want the state telling them what to do.
Thank you. Funding for nonprofits has been an issue of contention in recent years. What, if any, role should county government have in funding nonprofits? Ms. Allison, you can go first.
There are a lot of nonprofits in my research. There's the Nonprofit Center. Are you referring to the Nonprofit Center, the 23 organizations that are in that building, when you refer to nonprofits?
No, we're referring to the nonprofits that get funding from the county each year.
Okay. I support the efforts of many nonprofit organizations and appreciate the societal value that they add to our community. Regardless, it's a full-time job for many professional and volunteer groups to assist in discovering funding sources. Reviewing various components with the funds also must be considered because of the possibilities that are so many. Grant monies from federal and state sources potentially have strings attached when they arrive in Carroll County. And some of that grant money, when it dries up, of course, then what do we do? Do we go to that tax well? We shouldn't be saddling our future to support nonprofits if they can't raise funds. And of course, we want to figure out how to help them raise their own funds. But as I said, that's a full-time job for a lot of professional people to do. Basically, we need big government out of the way so that businesses can grow. A profitable business always has been most generous in donating to worthy causes. I intend on focusing in assisted business growth and not interfering in their ability to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, Carroll County is very fortunate in that we have some very excellent nonprofit organizations that provide that safety net that Ronald Reagan talked about in terms of social services in the community. They are some of the most accountable programs that we have in the community. They are some of the most transparent things that we have in terms of what we scrutinize at the commissioner level. They come in with all kinds of statistics about how they use the money, how much of it is from the county, where their other sources are, and how they perform. And they do the kinds of things that you would want these types of programs to do. They get people back to work. They get people back in their own housing. They get people off of drugs. And actually, they take on some of the biggest challenges that we have in our community. They also stand up for some of the most vulnerable people in our community, people with disabilities, our Rape Crisis Center. And so as you go through it and you say, okay, in many jurisdictions, these nonprofits would be part of government. Carroll County has taken the smaller government approach by reaching out to private nonprofits that take what contribution we make to them and leverage it. And they leverage it in such an extraordinary way in terms of using some of our in-kind as the ability, and actually we're benefiting from one tonight as we sit here being filmed by the Community Media Center, which is one of the organizations that we partner with and provide funding. They do a lot of things beyond what we're able to fund them with. And so we have folks that raise money. We have folks that go out and work through the problems that would otherwise show up in our community as much, much bigger problems or a burden for government, and they do it for cents on the dollar. So there's been a lot of discussion about cutting nonprofits. Our proposal, the Howard Shoemaker proposal, calls for a 3% increase this year. It's overdue. It's justified. It is an excellent investment in the community.
Thank you. Sort of following up with that, the current board also has created its own $400,000 Educational Opportunity Fund, now administered through the Community Foundation, for those who homeschool or send their children to private or religious schools. Do you agree or disagree with the policy of using taxpayer money to subsidize these organizations? And please explain. Mr. Howard, if you could go first.
Sure. Yeah, I think it falls under the same category. I voted for the fund. I know there's some question about how enthusiastically I voted for the fund, so I'll leave that to others as far as what my psychology was. But a lot of times you'll find that the first iteration or the first idea that comes out on our board really needs some scrutiny, really needs to be given the once over or maybe the 2 or 3 times over before it's really what should be policy. The challenge that we have with the Education Opportunity Fund isn't that it's necessarily a bad idea. In fact, in the proposal that Commissioner Shoemaker and I came out with last night, we put another $150,000 into the fund for future funding in the next budget year. I believe that the community for education includes the public school system, the libraries, the community college, and our private schools, and our homeschool community. So the simple fact is, it's not necessarily at odds with any of those things. However, we have a fund that is very, very new that's in a pilot program. Now, in its pilot program, 90 days in, it took $400,000, and it's essentially about all gone. And before we even get to the next budget session, there was a presentation coming back asking not for future funding in a future year, but another $400,000 in the same year. And one of my fellow commissioners, maybe someone Ms. Allison would consider to be a true conservative, actually suggested that the success of the program should be measured by how much money has been given out. Now, if that's not right out of the Annapolis playbook, I can't imagine what is. The success of the program will be when we know that more kids have been able to avail themselves of private schools or homeschooling because this fund has done something. It is way too early to do that, and yet I am willing to keep another level of commitment in the coming year while we test that premise. I think education, I'm a product of a private high school, so I think, I think very highly of them. But the bottom line is, the fact is, it needs to prove its ability to perform like our other nonprofits have performed.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Well, considering that I think somewhere between 20 and 25% of Carroll County's children go to non-public schools, I don't have a problem with giving them some of that funds. As I understood it, it was a one-time fund. I was discussing that with my daughter. She has, and my grandchildren, we have 3 grandchildren in the public schools here in Carroll County. And her 4th child, she drives 70 miles in the morning to take her child to an independent school and to her job. So she elected with the 4th child because she is concerned with what's going on in the schools. And when I asked her, I said, well, they've made a fund, and because your child is going to this school, perhaps there's something that you could use that for. And she said, no. She says, it's the taxpayers' money. You don't use that. It's supposed to be going back to the taxpayer. So that's just a view from within my house regarding that $400,000.
Thank you. Given that Carroll County is a bedroom community, response time for volunteer fire departments and ambulance service can become an issue during the work week. What specific steps would you take to reduce this problem? And Ms. Allison, if you could start.
Well, I'm sure I would have to speak more with the fire departments. They probably have some suggestions and things in mind. One could say it could be traffic problems if the volunteers, depending on how far they are from their firehouse. But considering once they're at their firehouse, they do have a right-of-way on the road, I don't see that there's a problem with that. I'm not quite sure why that's questions asked, other than maybe the suggestion would be that, or consideration, some people must be thinking of having full-time firemen. And again, I am not in the position or have not been in the position to talk or examine documents that would help me make a more affirmative commitment in a statement is what should be done. But I'm imagining that it's not as bad as the question may try to suggest. I haven't ever heard, since I've been in Carroll County, of someone losing life because a fireman couldn't get there.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Yeah, I think the question stems from concerns that have been raised, and we had some findings of exceptional circumstances on some building projects when one fire company was struggling with its response time. I think the reality is that that was a statistical look at things. We have excellent response time. We have excellent performance. And in many cases, the second responding station is actually on the scene before what would have been the first responding station. And that skews the statistics just a little bit. We are very fortunate in Carroll County to have volunteer fire companies that do an excellent, excellent job. And if we had to absorb that cost into a full-time paid system, we'd probably be talking about something on the order of $25 to $30 million. These people are heroic in what they do. They do it very, very well, and they ask very little of the community. It is for that reason that when they come before us and they ask for things, I take it very seriously. This has been a dividing point on our board. We have had them come before us looking for fire equipment, and we've had lengthy discussions about whether there was somehow a bait and switch being done because we got a used vehicle for the price we thought we were going to get a new one for. There was a tremendous amount of consternation on the board when the fire company here in Sykesville in District 5 in the blizzard of 2010 suffered that fire and was destroyed, in loaning them the funds to rebuild the facility in a way that would accommodate their needs into the future, to the point where there was actually a subversive action to try to get this undone by some form of a business intervention. The fact is, when you have firefighters willing to voluntarily go into a burning building, you give them the equipment that they need, unless their requests are outrageous. This board should be embarrassed by anybody that has voted dissentingly on any of the requests that have been made, and I think you'll find in our plans going forward, including the Public Safety Training Center, we need to give these folks what they need so they can retain and attract new volunteers, and they can accommodate the things that it's going to take to keep this a volunteer system on into the future.
Thank you. We talked a little bit earlier about the importance of economic development in the county in general. But what are your specific plans to bring businesses and industry to your district? Mr. Howard, if you could start.
Well, I think in this district, there are a couple notable projects that I've been very involved in. Last time we were out doing this campaigning thing, I talked about the intersection in front of Warfield as the intersection to nowhere. Even did a video about it. This coming week, the expectation is the town of Sykesville will be signing a contract with the Warfield development group that's going to develop that property and bring up economic development, a project that had been frozen for quite some time. Some of that was brought about because we got involved. Commissioner Roush and I serve now on the Warfield Development Corporation. We were able to bring about some resources to help them get the project moving again, and it's a success. We were able to work successfully with the folks that are rehabilitating Carrolltown Mall. A lot of it was just communication and making sure that things were continuing to flow, and yet that project had some hiccups along the way, and now we see the rehabilitation of that project. But I think really it's more important that we look at economic development across the entire county. I don't really look at it specifically for my district, because wherever a job is, wherever a property tax dollar is created, it's benefiting everybody. And so I think I've been equally interested in the things that have been happening up by the airport, the development of the Harrison Leisure property in Mount Airy, the business park up in Hampstead. Those are all great opportunities. So what do we do to attract them? Well, first of all, we have a top-notch economic development person in Jack Liburn who goes out and finds companies and attracts them here and brings them in and follows up with them to make sure that they're happy and their needs are met, and finds resources with the state to get them here and get them on good footing. We have a small business program called the Carroll Business Path, which I originated, which takes a completely different approach in terms of helping businesses get started. And then we do things like the Get Business Now conference that we hosted a couple of years ago that really inspired businesses to get out and get connected and learn how to do business in the community and that kind of thing. It's a whole host of activities, and we've seen real success, I think, over the last 4 years.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Question, please.
What was that question?
What would you do to promote economic development in your district?
Right. What would you do to promote economic development, or what specific steps would you take to bring business and industry to your district?
Oh, like I said before, keep government out of the way. And also, I'm wondering why the density that's happening in District 5 is happening at the rate it is happening. As far as housing goes, I notice at 26 and 32, Sykesville Road and Liberty Road, if I look in there, there's a building going up with shops in the bottom and housing on the top. It's really unattractive, and it looks like it's going to be small apartments above a shopping center in an already dense area. And everywhere I drive, I'm starting to see dense housing pop up. I just don't think that's what Carroll Countyans want in our district. And basically, there's a lot of empty commercial space. That new shopping center that was built is abysmally empty. I think that the one at the Carroll Town, at the Carroll Mall, is going to be very nice. Everybody's very happy about it, and it's all being done with private money. But this government development program where they're putting funds into putting in more and more commercial property and higher density housing, this is not what District 5 people want. We don't want to be Randallstown. We want to keep our rural fiber.
Thank you. We have a couple different questions about, or submitted about, the focus of Carroll County government and the individual commissioners as they relate to state issues, national issues, and beyond. I mean, it's been an issue with whether it's the Second Amendment issue or the state's gun law or whatever else. What, as a commissioner, are your main priorities and the main things that you will focus on when you're in office? Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
The main thing I would focus on, well, to start with, would certainly a great deal of study, but the economy. Our economy is, we're in a time when people are quite uncomfortable. Also, too many demands are coming from governments outside of our county, and we have to address how we're going to handle those demands and in what form they come in. So yes, I would say that our economy is our biggest issue, and likewise, I attach Common Core to that. I don't want Common Core in our schools, and anything that I could do as a commissioner with the body of commissioners to rid our county of Common Core, I am willing to find anything that the Board of Commissioners can do to stop Common Core here.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, I think my priorities have been pretty clear over the last several years, but it's worth restating. I believe, first of all, if you don't want government overreach, it's good if government officials understand what their job is and what it is not. And the job of local government for county commissioners is to provide public safety, infrastructure, and education in an excellent way while protecting the our citizens' constitutional rights and doing it in a way that is cost effective. This is our mission statement. It's in every office in the Carroll County government. I sat with Commissioner Rothschild. We wrote it ourselves, brought it to the rest of the board, and that is what I think the priority should be. It is not our job to use our local government office as a national soapbox. When national issues need to be addressed by virtue of that, then I think we're in the wrong place. Now, that doesn't mean when issues come up that affect our citizens and we have an impact on them, that we don't address them. So I want to make it abundantly clear here that in this last legislative session, after the Common Core Forum, which apparently I was opposed to, but only because I thought nothing would come of it, which is what came of it, I took the information that I had, the information that I developed through my study group, the information that I garnered in a number of other ways, and proposed 5 different legislative items that I asked our delegates and senators to take to Annapolis. One was to stop Common Core. One was to slow it down. One was to eliminate the assessments. One was to stop the second-generation environmental, the science standards. The fact is, only one of those got picked up. Delegate Reedy introduced the science standards legislation. It didn't make it beyond committee, but I still stand as the only commissioner that has taken any action on Common Core, including voting against it in the beginning. And so the bottom line is, sure, you use the office when the things that you're doing are being run afoul by the state and federal government, and you protect the citizens as best you can. But it is not a place to use as a place for personal notoriety and a soapbox.
Thank you. Our next question concerns aging in place. And what do you think of older people aging in place, and what could or would you do as a commissioner to encourage that idea? Mr. Howard, if you could go first.
I think aging in place is a very important thing. It's important for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is the longer someone has their independence, the more access they really have to their own freedoms and really the exercise of their own rights. So whenever we can encourage that, we as a community should encourage that. It's also much more cost effective than having people in very expensive facilities. And so what we find is sometimes there are accommodations that can be made. Sometimes there are the processes that people need to go through to make a home more ready for someone that maybe has a disability that has come along with the aging process. Some of it is making things more accessible in terms of what we do within the county as far as transportation. Some of it is to take advantage of programs that are designed to provide some resources to our citizens to retrofit and do some things associated with that. In the long scheme of things, I think it's a worthwhile program. Carroll County's had some real success in doing that. We have an excellent Bureau of Aging. We also have a rapidly aging population. The percentage of Carroll County citizens over 65 is increasing every single day, and it's going to continue to increase for some time. And so these are the kinds of things that from a society standpoint are good, from a freedom and independence standpoint are good, and from a cost effectiveness standpoint. So I support that program, those programs.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Oh, yes, indeed. I think it's probably healthier and in many respects for people to age in place. People are very comfortable in their own surroundings, and anything that we can do to help them so far as, I think there are programs even Maryland has that they can get tax credits and get some assistance with their heating bills and so forth. But yes, examining how you can help people live in place as they get elderly is certainly an excellent concept.
Thank you. The current board has struggled with the issue of waste to energy. What is your position on the waste to energy joint proposal with Frederick County? And if Carroll does withdraw from that, what is your vision for disposing of solid waste in the future? And Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
One moment, please. Waste to energy is a good concept in a lot of respects, but first, I support zero waste solutions. I understand that we could recycle as much as 80% of our waste, and so I'm certainly open to having a private company come and install a material recovery facility. If we look around with these technologies that are being developed, and have some patience. So many demands have all of a sudden showed up at our doorstep when our economy's been going down. It seems like we're in this mire of, you've got to do everything now, but by the way, the economy's not vibrant. So sure, I'm for being patient. Some people claim that we only have another 56 years to use our landfill. So I think we have time to be patient and give some of these technologies to get more affordable and figure out how to take advantage of those with private companies, making it available for them to come here and run a new business, new money, new jobs, new business.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
I believe the waste to energy question really relates specifically to our relationship with this project that was supposed to take place as a joint venture between Carroll County and Frederick County. And we're a little bit hamstrung, those of us that are in office, because we're under some negotiations right now in terms of what can and cannot be said, because we're trying to negotiate our way out of that contract. It didn't take much imagination if you saw the 6-foot stop the incinerator signs that I had at the polls in 2010 on Election Day, that I wasn't in favor of the project. I wasn't in favor of the project as it related to Carroll County's interest in the project, with full recognition that there may be other jurisdictions in Frederick themselves that had some reason to go forward with it and that may benefit their particular needs. But I was pretty clear on the fact, or very clear on the fact, that it was not something I wanted to see for Carroll County. From the time that I've been in office, I have been absolutely resolute in making sure that we would not leave this 4-year period of time without this issue resolved. Now, during this period of time, staff and folks have talked about wanting to negotiate with other jurisdictions because getting out of this plan left us with a potential liability of upwards of $3 million. That was negotiated by the prior board. My feeling all along was that if we were going to successfully get out of this plan for anything less than that, we had to make it abundantly clear to all involved that we were getting out of the project. So I was adamant in wanting to make sure that we set a restriction that when the permits were issued, we would get out. We passed that as a board. I wanted to make it clear that when we had a surplus 2 years ago, we put the $3 million in a fund to say, you know what, not only are we ready to get out, but the money's there to get out. And lo and behold, as we started talking about some impending deadlines, all of a sudden, by surprise, now some options come to the table, and we're hopeful that they will yield a better outcome. I'm hopeful as well, and if they do, it's really to the credit of our excellent staff. But I was against it.
Thank you.
And I still am.
Do you support changes to our Sheriff's Department pension system? Mr. Howard, if you could go first.
Well, I think one of the things that we have to look at as a community overall, and it is the biggest challenge that we have facing us going forward, is compensation for those critical services that we have across the county. Whether it is what we pay teachers, what we pay county staff, our retirement benefits for the Sheriff's Department, any of those different organizations or different divisions of government activity, we've got to realize that unless we become more competitive, all Carroll County is going to do is continue to be a training ground where we bring people here and we get them started and we have excellent programs, and then they get to year 2 or 3 or 4, or maybe they don't come in the first place, and there's some jurisdiction that's paying considerably more. Now, it doesn't mean we have to be the highest paying jurisdiction, but it means that we need to be more competitive. And I think the retirement plan as it relates to law enforcement is one of those areas that needs that kind of scrutiny. We need to close the gap. I'm very pleased as a candidate in this district to have the endorsement of the FOP. I think the reaction that I have to this situation is simply that it is not a problem you solve overnight, but it is something that we are going to have some real serious discussion about, because we simply have to close the gap. We know when we close the gap, as a matter of fact, that other factors make people want to work in Carroll County, teach in Carroll County, provide law enforcement in Carroll County, fight fires in Carroll County. We don't have to be all the way there, but we got to close the gap. And so I'm committed to at least participating in that process and making progress in that regard.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
Oh, yes. The Sheriff's Department is our police now, which is a good idea. And yes, they do have to address their concerns of being a training center for training. And then 3 or 4 years, the people they've trained have moved on to other places. But I've even asked myself, I said, well, I wonder if there was such a good training facility, maybe we should offer to train sheriffs for other counties, and they could pay us to train them instead of us having the sheriffs come here and train and then go for a job somewhere else. Maybe the possibilities for us to have a sheriff training center and have the Sheriff's Department earn some money. But yes, the budgetary requirements are a request that many people make. Certainly is reasonable that the Sheriff's Department's asking to have a graduated process for their employees. I'm very agreeable to working with them to achieving their goal. They're well worth it. But, you know, everything has to have some balance.
Thank you. We have a question. Again, it's one of those sort of loaded question type things. It says, would you look at all sides of an issue before you make up your mind, which sort of intones that maybe some people don't. But I'd like to expand upon that a little bit anyway and say, just ask you both, what process do you use to make up your mind on an important issue? And can you give us an example of when you've used that process? And Ms. Allison, if you could go first.
Well, I guess I could use the process of why I'm sitting here before you. When I started paying attention to my local politics and state and national, I did a lot of homework, and that's what I do. I'm a project-oriented person. So if I want to know about something, I do a lot of research to make my decision, just as I did in coming to run for this office. And although I'm not yet developed or skilled in being a presenter of my research definitely made me make this decision, and it's founded on some very solid evidence.
Thank you. Mr. Howard?
Well, I think when you're making an important decision, it really is very important to hear all sides. And, you know, that's why I'm somewhat astonished by the concern that when I've attempted to do that with some of these work groups and things like that, that's concerning, because this is how I get the information that I need to make good decisions. So, for example, when we were confronted with solid waste, and of course making the decision on waste energy is only half the decision, then the decision has to come along, which is, well, what are you going to do with the waste if you're not sending it to the incinerator? There were a lot of different ideas out there, and there were a lot of conflicting thoughts, and there were technologies we were unaware of. And so I was very proud to take two people that I thought had very differing political views, that I thought had very different perspectives on the whole idea, and bring them together. And then to populate a group of 7 or 8 additional people that also had a wide array of views so that they could focus on the issue. And I asked them to do one thing and to do it with 3 caveats, was to bring solutions that were, A, real. They weren't imagined, they weren't science fiction, they were real. 2, that they were scalable, that they could be done beyond someone's backyard, they could be done for a whole community. And lastly, that they could be done cost effectively. And it was amazing how quickly this group of very divergent ideas and opinions weeded out the different options, brought a subset of options together, allowed us to get some presenters in front of us, and start to come up with some solutions. I got to believe my entire board believes this is a good idea, because then they've taken this group's work and then adopted a solid waste group for the board as a whole to go through this process. And I think that's the kind of thing that brings real ideas to the table. If we sit around with people that only agree with us, only look like Ronald Reagan, or only have a particular ideal that we already agree with, the bottom line is we are not going to fully vet these ideas, and we do not end up with the best solutions. And so I believe I've been very successful in doing that in a whole host of different ways.
Thank you. I appreciate you both taking the time to answer the questions from the audience and those that were submitted. At this time, you'll each have 2 minutes for a closing statement. Mr. Howard, you can go first.
Well, first of all, like I said at the very beginning, it's been a great honor to serve as county commissioner. It was an honor to serve as president. I think we've accomplished a lot under this board. I think it is the most successful board in terms of what the conservatives, what people in the community say they want done with government. And so I believe that if people look at what has been accomplished, the goals that have been laid out, the approach that I've been taken, that there's a very strong reason for your vote on June 24th. I understand there are some folks that don't like my personal style or my approach. There's been some personality conflicts, and those are things that everybody's got to assess for themselves. But I don't think there's any question in terms of understanding the issues, the ability to get people to work together, the ability to get things done, the energy to go out and make sure that the community is represented, dozens and dozens and dozens of community meetings, accessibility beyond belief to the citizens, and a real willingness to do things that don't benefit me, that benefit the community as a whole. I believe that would justify your vote on June 24th. The simple fact is this: I have a successful business. I have a lot of other interests. I don't have a need to be in office unless it's contributing to the community around. And yet I look at so many of the challenges that we will face over the next 4 years and know that they will define Carroll County, the Carroll County that my kids will grow up in and their children will grow up in as we go forward. I believe that we have the ability to strengthen this community starting this year, and I think it really is a core commitment to what I've said all along: public safety, infrastructure, and education supported by good economic development. So I will work hard for you. I believe that my record speaks for itself. I think the opportunity for us to do some great things together is still out there, and I would appreciate your vote on June 24th and look forward to serving another 4 years as Commissioner for District 5. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Allison?
I'm a staunch warrior for small business growth and preserving District 5's rural charm. I will follow through with a promise to dismantle Common Core with every tool the Board of Commissioners has available to them. Private sector of economic development is a priority, and I will protect our community by ensuring we have a strong sheriff's department. I will not use your money to put government into the banking business, replace state agency personnel, or create work groups that work in secret at taxpayer expense. I will work with community leaders to develop environmentally friendly solutions to waste disposal. I will work with our Board of Education to cut costs and develop an affordable budget that enables us to give our teachers raises. Most importantly, I will tell the truth to the citizens and teachers. To be perfectly frank, we face some serious challenges, and I will address them responsibly. It's time to put integrity back into government. District 5 isn't a corporate playground to be used by a commissioner to advance his business ambitions. I don't want District 5 turned into another Randallstown, and I don't believe the resources of government should be used to advance any politician's career. I stand for integrity in government. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, you should ask yourself one important question. Why is Mr. Howard being endorsed by labor unions throughout the county? The answer is obvious. They believe he is sympathetic to their agenda of transferring money out of your pocket into their own. Doesn't sound like a conservative to me. The unions know what Mr. Howard stands for. I think it's time you know. My name is Kathy Allison. I'm the only Republican sitting at this table, and I ask for your vote on June 24th. Together.
Thank you.
Our candidates for giving thoughtful answers this evening. I want to express my thanks to Mr. Jim Lee for acting as moderator this evening, and I want to thank Dan and his daughter for being our timers for this evening. I'm grateful to the Community Media Center for being so devoted to this whole question of getting the information out to the citizens of Carroll County. Also to WTTR for making that a possibility. This District 5 Commissioners Candidate Forum will be rebroadcast on Cable Channel 19. The first broadcast will be tomorrow at 7 p.m. Additional broadcasts will be Thursday at 7:30 and on April 18th at 9 in the morning and at noon, April 21st at 7:30, and April 22nd at 9 and noon. Forum will also be available for you viewing on Community Media Center's website at www.carrollmediacenter.org. Special thanks to the South Carroll Senior Center, which I had a devil of a time finding, I have to tell you, for allowing us to have the forum here this evening. Beautiful facility, very nice, and I'm so glad now that I know where it is. Okay. Carroll citizens should be aware that the electronic voters guide will be available from the League of Women Voters. We used to do the paper voters guide, but costs are prohibitive for publishing at this point in time. So vote411.org will be our electronic website, and what you will do is enter your address, all of the offices and candidates that you are eligible to consider will come up. You can look at their answers to questions side by side. You can print them out as a voter's sample ballot and things like that. So I think that those will be available, I was told, by May 8th. The candidates have until the 25th to answer their questions, and then we need a little bit of time to get all that put together. So that site again is www.vote411.org. And I thank you all for giving up your evening, and have a safe travel home.